All right, welcome everybody to the new faculty Pecha Kucha. If anybody has not been to a Pecha Kucha before, they're fast-paced, casual presentations. Each speaker gets exactly 20 seconds per slide and 20 slides on auto advance. They don't get to control it, so it just moves forward, and as each speaker finishes, the next slides pop up, the next speaker jumps on. So it kind of works like a TED Talk meets a TED Talk meets a karaoke night. Just kind of rolls, right? So as the next guy jumps on. We've got a bunch of great new talented faculty that are going to be presenting here tonight. We've had, since 2020, we've hired 33 new faculty, which is a tremendous amount. We weren't able to get everybody in the lineup tonight, so there will be a second edition of this event next semester in the spring, where we'll have more faculty presenting. But tonight we've got a great lineup. I'm not going to do much more talking other than to let you know that there is a hosted student-faculty mixer after this at the Lab Gastropub. So we'll all walk over there together afterwards. It's nothing formal other than me putting my credit card down and saying there's a tab for USC. So just order. It's not like there's an area roped off with a buffet or anything like that. It's just us going. But I think this is really, really a big part of us trying to reestablish studio culture in the school and kind of connect us to one another, not only as students to students, but also students to faculty, and also faculty to faculty, because many of the faculty here are new and actually don't know a lot of other faculty. And so I think this is a great opportunity for everybody to not only see some fantastic work, but get to know one another. So please welcome our new faculty, and I'm going to go ahead and kick things off by just handing the baton and letting the presentation run. So thank you very much. And so when I say go, 20 seconds starts. Ready? 1, 2, 3, go.
Hi, I'm Evelyn Tickle. I started my career here in downtown Los Angeles at 22 years old doing construction management in the Wells Fargo Tower. After the first 2 months, I was confronted with laying out a curb stop at with a center point in another building, and I thought, shit, what am I going to do about that? After SciArc, I moved back to the south, Charlottesville, Virginia. I bought an ancient house, built an addition. Gosh, I'm going faster than I thought I was going to go. Okay. Are they time?
They are time. They're one slide, you said. They're one slide ahead.
Okay, so I can slow down. Okay, after SciArc, I moved back to the south, to Charlottesville, Virginia. I bought an ancient house, built an addition, built formwork, continuous foundation, walls, stairs, sinks, poured concrete, 2 tons at 7 months pregnant. My guy running the truck said, I'm going to go home and tell my wife about that. I started teaching at the University of Virginia after 4 years, pitched a design-build program, set it up with the university, early shipping container renovation, maybe the first in the United States for a mobile student workshop. I eventually moved on to Team 2 students with 1 local architect and teams of 2, commissioned to design and build in 1 semester. An architectural intervention in their house ranged from suspended glass stairs, urban garden walls, and purple backyards, and developed some very illustrious careers for the students after that. I won a Rome Prize in architecture from the American Academy from this work. We arrived on 9/14, a couple of days after 9/11, with 2 toddlers in tow. Immediately poured a thin concrete wall, a curvaceous wall formed with manipulated scaffolding, exhibited in a group show at Modern Museum of Art in Rome. They broke it. I wandered around Rome. I was exhausted from parenting and pouring concrete. I took in the steady Caravaggio and Bernini, although I swore I would not do it. I was absorbed in the culture, the life, the gardens, the markets, the vegetables, and the fruits. I became obsessed with microspace and dying tulip petals and wanted to make that space. I considered growing beans up a structure and decided not to. Instead, designed a reusable shape, continuously changing mold to cast 3.5 single double bed and single bed alabastrina floors read and explored by scale of the body, building, and terrain. I moved back to Charlottesville, Virginia. There was no work after 9/11. Started a concrete company. Pretty hard to find concrete to do sexy accoutrements for offices and homes, herbaceous walls and architectural firms, bathrooms, to sectional bathtubs, benches, bathrooms, wall panels, and the like. I'm sure I did some more things in there too. And then I took the design build studios on the road in a way of supporting the business as well as doing more design build at UPenn and the University of Michigan. We did individual projects at the University of the University of Michigan, and at University of Pennsylvania, we designed a gallery for Oswald Romberg. That one was an outdoor truck stop with a glycerin shower wall. I embarked on a lifetime challenge, revitalizing a latent design program in the next town over. Parklets using sculpture students, remnants, turned them into chairs, concrete lounges, formed late night into the night, picked up by tractors, taken to commission parks in DC. I started the concrete lab. That slide will pop up in a second. That's the concrete lounge. Started a concrete lab, taught digital fabrication classes, looking at molds and how we can produce those digitally. That's the shop in the top left-hand corner. We did other things. We made molds with seaweed as well. And I developed a deep thesis program with suits for birth, through life, and into death. Skin walls, facade walls for collecting water for schools in Haiti, and upper level pedestrian parks running through the sky rises. And I decided to, going into a little family history, my family developed technology, slip forms used for concrete for multiple story skyscrapers since I set about a decade ago to invent an environmental concrete to make up for possibly a long-range sin. I looked at the oyster for inspiration. It develops its own concrete. It's an amazing structural engineer. It buttresses, it has top plates, they cantilever, they arch to make contiguous shapes. I use the concrete that I formed to match that of the oyster shell with a high calcium carbonate to make the products. I tested these products. Products range from the reef tile to the reef disc to the reef tangle and to the little hero called the spat catcher. I use the concrete to make all of these products, very coarse products, to jumpstart native reefs. They can be used together, individually, stacked, etc. Let's see. I originally tried to make some very, very sexy things for the reef tile and decided that I needed to get down to business and to make a reef tile that would allow the oysters to be successful. Tested this with the Virginia Institute of Marine Science with some great success that matched that of 5-year reefs only after 1 year. It was at this point that I really realized that I needed to go on and make the business, to revitalize the ecosystems, to hold back the shorelines, and to decarbonize the water. This is one of my favorite projects. This is Reef Tangle, made of those modular units put together into an archipelago, and the archipelago is dropped down to the bottom of the deeper water that I work with the oysters. And these can be, the reef tangles can be made into any size from room size to the spherical unit. And then these are the results after only 1 year. And this is what kind of makes me go back to work every day, doing the hard work to set up a business, revitalize ecosystems, and move into deep water reefs for reviving the ecosystems. Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Hi, I'm Taka. I want to share tonight the Princeton thesis I just finished this past semester. Before that, I wanted to start a little story about my dad. So I was born in Los Angeles, and my dad moved here from Japan. And at Chaya, which was a restaurant in Los Angeles, he would come to invent the dish in the tartar. And I really think about how it's a very Los Angeles story because it required a lot of a very specific spatial context and virtual experiences that can happen. And I look at LA, I look at how this restaurant is right next to the hospital I was born in, which is also right next to Mega Mall, Beverly Center. And not many people know this, but inside of the Beverly Center is a concave surface which houses an oil extraction facility that still runs today. And so I really think about how architecture, especially in the context of Los Angeles, is certainly weaponized to disguise oil derricks and extraction equipment just hidden in plain sight as art, as a banal office building, a synagogue, or even just a resort island off the distance in Long Beach. And so I think it becomes a kind of open question for policy. It's a widespread problem. You know, it's not just these rich neighborhoods that get these treatments. It's a lot of all kinds of neighborhoods that just have open fields of oil extraction, causing higher rates of cancer, asthma, just a kind of very blatant instance of environmental racism. And I think there's a lot of incredible work being done by nonprofit organizations such as Stand LA and the Natural Resources Defense Council that are really working with city officials to kind of answer this open question of what happens, especially because of Los Angeles' recent ban on extraction within city limits. I think architects need to chime in a little bit about what becomes of these sites, especially as they're spatialized and integrated in urban context. So while I was at Princeton, I really looked at the kind of entangled history between architecture and visual media. Not just the building components that are really embedded in our building methods and practices, but also how the history of oil companies is also the history of architecture. And so that embedded in itself is architecture. So I looked at the ways in which oil wells are just holes in the ground, and that in itself is incredibly useful. There are current existing technologies of retrofitting old oil wells into geothermal wells as a way to produce a free source of heat and electricity. And Los Angeles actually represents an interesting overlap between geothermal potential and oil extraction. So this is a kind of way in which we can map all over these existing oil wells, new types of uses and new types of programs in a way that's distributed across the city. Because these sites kind of exist already, we can kind of introduce new substations. I think architects also have a responsibility to enliven the public imagination. How do you communicate these kinds of revolutionary ideas in a way that's palatable and will make people want to vote in certain ways? So these are some posters that are kind of learning from the WPA in a way that kind of got urban thinking. This is one of the sites I was looking at. It was quite large scale. It's the Eaglewood of the site. Trying to illustrate here how you can extract the geothermal potential, consolidate them, and produce a new type of geothermal power station that's also habitable as a community pool. And these are kind of embedded in the way that electricity would be distributed from this network into the city across the existing energy lines. And substations currently, as they stand, are not occupiable. They have high fences and look rather temple-like. These that I'm proposing are actually occupiable and would offer many different kinds of uses, depending on the kinds of needs that are required by a certain neighborhood. So whether it be to grow food, given in access to food, housing, kind of public threshold, just for shade. Shade is an equity issue in the city as well. Very, very simple things that would allow for the public imagination to kind of reoccupy these spaces that have harmed for so long. They can also be very diffuse and small scale in the way that they're distributed through the city. It's not just electricity, it's also a free source of hot water. And hot water is a free way to heat your homes. We don't have very cold winters here, but I think that actually proves better. That we don't need to be using electricity to heat our homes. And then the way that we can kind of acknowledge that systems can, buildings are not just plugged into the ground, they can actually establish a network between other existing buildings and start to create a distribution network of electricity, but also heating and cooling that can happen integrated into the buildings themselves. And thinking beyond the tectonics, I was also thinking of buildings as a kind of thermal environment unto themselves that serve many needs. In one of the examples, I was thinking of ways in which a carport from one side could also be perceived as a public bathhouse for sanitation that can be occupied not only by people but by all of them. And so these are the many kinds of examples that I was really trying to use to imagine different kinds of people in different spaces and completely rethink the idea of what a substation could be as distributed city. I was also really thinking about how we don't have to have a magic kind of new technology that gets implemented. I think the simplicity of radiant tubing can replace the needs for installation. Since we do have a resource of heat, we can have an active installation system that runs through floors, walls, and ceilings, minimizes material waste, but also produces less of a need on forced air and conventional air conditioning. So thinking of ways sections can be nested, thinking of layered sections as a way to produce microclimates in your buildings, I think can be a new way of not having a single view on thermal comfort and can be a little bit more utilitarian. I also thought about the ways in which geothermal energy offers all sorts of byproducts, and those byproducts can actually be a place for design and a place for people to enjoy the architecture that we produce. So architecture doesn't just have to be space, I think it can also be a design experience that is accessible to the public. And finally, my thesis presentation was in the form of a Los Angeles City Council meeting, which I think is quite pertinent at this very moment. And so it's kind of a call to action to say that I think architecture should be a little bit more engaged in the public realm and have a greater sense of what our role in that space can be. Thank you.
It's interesting you mentioned your father. I lost him last week, and I'm only here because I lost him last week. Otherwise, I probably would have been fine this week. And it's really because of an observation that I made from him a while ago, and by a while, I really mean my childhood. And it was really about being available and accessible. He taught me that my time was the most valuable thing I had to offer, and so my time was spent sweeping the streets under his direction. And it was really about thinking about reverberating impact and what it means to start to think about the difference between being reactive and being prescriptive. Historically, 1 in 4 people that look like me will be incarcerated, and so you can imagine the level of community it takes to get someone like me here. This is me observing what those moments are, and I actually am my ancestors' wildest dreams, like many of you are. Some of you are first time, second time, even third generation college goers, which is to say that you were already a success story to many of your families. And so what I'm interested in is the idea of dignity. I'm interested in the idea of access, and I'm interested in the idea of what it means to kind of build a fuller community through the discourse of architecture. And so above my shoulder here, you can actually see the Midnight Missions laundry room as I kind of found it. And so what I kind of uniquely am kind of responding to is this larger idea that historically minority populations are always inheriting spaces which programming was never really meant for them. And so the projects that you'll see in the screen over the next, 18, 17 slides now, will holistically be about that observation, which is to say, over the last 2 years, I've kind of finished all the projects that you see on the screen, where architecture has a unique opportunity to have reverberating impact, start to build community, and meet people where they are. And so this is a laundry room that, as you've seen on the screen before, 73,000 loads of clothes are laundered. I don't have the ability to launder 73,000 clothes, but I can darn sure make a space that resonates with Tide, Whirlpool, and Procter & Gamble for them to donate the facility to Skid Row, to the folks on housing, because these towels actually are the towels that folks living in or experiencing homelessness use to kind of dry themselves off. This is the idea of what it means to have dignity. The young lady that you see on the screen, this is a vocational apparatus. I am indifferent to what the architecture means to a room of architects. It means everything to me to connect with this young lady on the screen. Because that's what we do. We create space that creates life, not creates life, but allows people to live their life and to paint their lives in a tapestry in the space. And so we have to be really, really intentional about what it is we're interested in, what we're after. The second thing I mentioned, access. We know that, especially in the artistic community, time and money are the top, two things that deter people from art. Access the third. And so we wanted to create a gallery that provided access. We wanted to create a space in the middle of COVID, and again, reposition the observation of inherited space and this larger idea of kind of having to create these larger unification mechanisms and strategies that really start to help us understand ourselves, right? You can see this as the migration patterns in Chicago. They would posit that these things in churches, recreation centers, were just repositioned or envisioned or kind of imagined to make sure that we understood ourselves. And with the trauma of the black men, and kind of mistreatment, the murder of black and brown bodies, a renaissance was happening. And so all this trauma needed to be kind of expressed in a kind of larger artistic commentary. And I call this creative expression, and that creative expression is housed here. And so what we were really interested in doing is kind of creating space for social commentary. And as you can see, there's a lot of kind of exposed kind of members and features that's associated with this space, and that's because this is actually in a kind of a text house boulevard, which means that our parents and our parents' parents and our parents' parents actually worked here to give us an opportunity to exist in the space that we do and to create the way that we do. And so there's a larger expression about intergenerational thought and memory. And so what we were interested in is really kind of being able to express that. So we never erase our family's histories. What we do is we stand on the shoulders of. And so intergenerational thought means it can't just be about the people that can do it today. It has to be about the people that do it tomorrow. And so what we're interested in is really making sure community is larger than one particular people group or one particular age. And so what we're thinking about is similar to the idea of running a 4x100. The baton change is the most important part of that race. Just like in our lives, the most important part of what we do is the exchange of ideas to one another to continue to make things move forward. This is the Debbie Allen Dance Project. This is really special to me, not because it's Miss Allen, but it's really because when I grew up and I started and I talked about my grandfather, he actually put me in dance classes. And so my actual first trip to university was at the University of the Arts, where I actually got a scholarship to dance. That was 100,000 years ago, but today I actually had an opportunity to kind of reimagine and rethink what that means. And so to me it became cyclical in nature, where it was about this idea of creating hope. And so I really was interested in kind of creating a space with a larger team to allow people to hope and to dream the way that I've dreamed, and the way that I've kind of seen things. So I think, when we start to talk about this larger idea of architecture and what it has the appetite or even the capacity to do, it's really about building new community. So you can see this large gathering, and to me, this is the idea of a larger community, right? So everyone that's in this building put down something or invested something to make sure Miss Allen got this building. I think most times you think, and you saw it started as a warehouse, most times there's this larger appetite to really kind of believe that these things, people have the money. But in my experience, in my community, it takes all of us to come together to be able to do anything, to change anything. And so my architecture holistically is interested in this idea of that larger community. And so this is actually the last thing that I've done, and it was probably 2 weeks ago. I did a jet installation for the Jet magazine for the movie release of Till. And when they called me, it was far too late to do anything, but I took it upon myself because at the end of the day, many of us have lived our lives under that. And so I thought it was really important to kind of show that. And I think the other thing that's important, this is kind of Skid Row Housing and Brozier, which we kind of worked on as a larger team at the firm. But it really just shows that I'm indifferent to scale. You saw a laundry room that was probably 15 by 30, and into something that's, a huge, this is actually some of this.
Hi, I'm Shane, and I'll say that I grew up in LA, and I was born at the St. Cedar Sinai, across from the Beverly Center. So coming back to my undergrad thesis in SCIAR 2014, my first love was animation. So I decided to incorporate animation as a design tool for my undergrad thesis. That's the first animation, 1908. I drew all of the images on the right of Homer Simpson's facial features going through his head and out the other side. And I wanted to treat each of those as individual characters rather than just a single object. Thousands, millions of objects potentially. And then for my thesis, I upset a number of people at SCIAR by deciding to turn a house into a cat. And I was interested in particular in how, for instance, a chimney turns into a tail, windows turn into eyes. And then if each of those million trillion characters in between each had identities. I thought I wanted to be an animator after that. I went to SCPS Unlimited, worked on the Westworld digital modeling. With little time to explain myself, I got fired because it turns out I'm not supposed to be an animator, I'm supposed to write about animation. So from there, I started to wean myself off of designing. But in 2015, I'm still designing. I work with my design partner, Kyle Brancasi. We work on these images of houses taking on a whole range of characters. At this time, I'm still interested in animation, animated architecture. So what if a house had 100 chimneys, or what if it was a bread box, or what if it got stepped on, or what if it was a Russian nesting doll? This is what I was working on at that time. We got that published, which I was excited about. And then in that same year, Ryan, who's going to present after me, co-curated an exhibition at a hotel near downtown. And so I got to turn one of the rooms in the motel into a museum of the history of the motel, where I took out all of the objects that were in the motel room and replaced them with paper-thin facsimiles, so that it could appear to be like a museum of every motel in America, the motel being kind of an American 20th century phenomenon. And then 2016, I went to MIT for my SMARTS degree, working again with Kyle on these maps of Disneyland done in different communication styles in the event that someone doesn't approach Disneyland in the same way that many others do. What if it was done in a Home Depot style, etc.? And then for my master's thesis, I convinced MIT to pay for me to go to the world's largest indoor water park in Germany. And so that's it on the left. I stayed there for 2 nights, 3 days. I took the photos you see there. And so for the thesis, I was interested in figuring out the underlying historical conditions of such a water park, where it emphasizes an interest in history, but really it's nostalgia. It emphasizes an interest in conservation, but it's actually consumption. And so this is a photo I took that leads visitors to the water park from the main space to the reproduced Amazonian River. And so I was just interested again in the artificiality of the space and how that artificiality is constructed. Where this is in Germany, and they are recapitulating the colonization of tropical regions of the world and placing them within this 17-acre former blimp hangar. And so then I came back to LA, and I should go back in a way to say that I've been running an Instagram since 2013 called Every Very Thing after my thesis. This is an interview I did with Yale Paprika. And so they asked me what were the interests I had in curating images for 9 years. I've been interested in how the built environment inadvertently reveals a sense of humor, or how the imperfections in the built environment can be revealed, explicated. This is essentially what I had said through an interview with Dwell magazine, in which a number of meme makers and shit posters were interviewed about where the new trends in design criticism are going. And so 3 years ago, I started my PhD in architecture at UCLA. These were my initial research subjects. That's an optical telegraph constructed during the French Revolution on the left, and then on the right is the helicopter program initiated for the Watts Rebellion. And then after that, I decided my true love is Los Angeles, taking it full circle in the early history of LA automobile culture through the Automobile Club of Southern California, which had a far larger effect on California infrastructure than many had imagined. This is a proposal the Auto Club did in 1937, predicting a number of motorways through the city before there had been grade separations. That's a rendering of new buildings designed across downtown LA. And then lastly, if anyone wants to email me asking for a copy of the walking maps I make of LA, I'd be happy to give them to you. I've made 2 maps so far, and I'm hoping to make 10 more. But I love walking through LA as a way of learning about the city. Thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm Ryan Martinez. Alan, thanks for putting this on. This is really great to get to know colleagues and hopefully for you guys to get to know us. Prior to me coming to USC, I was the director of the Wedge Gallery and the assistant chair of both undergrad and graduate students at Woodbury University, at SCIARC and UC Berkeley, and I also got my professional experience working in Frank Geary's office. So I think the work I'm going to be presenting today is research I've been working on maybe in the past 5 years. I think in particular I'm very interested in working on visual studies and how that translates into material thickness. I think this is both a kind of conceptual project, but it's also a literal project in the sense that we're taking, let's say, graphics or visual representation and trying to define how that can be translated into something like a building. I wanted to start with this quote by Michael Rock, who's the founder of 2x4. Think of the work you do in architecture school. How much of this is printed, written, illustrated, diagram, photoshopped, collage, animated, ultimately presented, all graphic. Think of the work we do in school, ultimately all graphic. So the stuff we're doing today, right, even right now, this presentation is graphic. And I want to make a clear distinction between the relationship between graphic design and architecture. On the left, we have a poster by Michael Beirut, who's a famous graphic designer. On the right, we have a section, the planetarium. And I think what's interesting about it is the poster relates to itself, where the section relates to other drawings. And I think architecture does this. We tend to point and relate to ourselves in more than one representation, especially if you think about the construction document. I'm very interested in graphic design and how graphic design might be able to be used as a disciplinary tool to try and investigate different ways of thinking about architecture and design in today's context. So for my project, I look particularly at 2 things. I look at posters and also typography. I'm very interested in the translation of things like typography into figuration that you could use for construction or for design. I consider them a kind of ready-made, something you can type in the computer and it's already produced. And these figures have certain characters to them. The other thing is posters. I'm always creating posters. So on the left, this is for the design of a single-family house. On the left, there's a kind of poster, and you have a projection of graphics. And on the right, you can start to see how that graphic is starting to affect the kind of sensibility of the project in itself. And so a lot of the times I'm making, let's say, graphic representation and then translating it in through program and also site specificity into some type of architectural intervention. And for the ultimate aim, it's this kind of construction document set that's starting to kind of point to itself in more than one type of representation. I think also, though, along the lines of let's say, poster design, there was another project I was working on where I was very interested in turning different types of orthographic drawings, inter-elevations, plans, and extra elevations, into a kind of paper model. This in particular is a cardboard model, and the idea was how can I start to translate the kind of graphic sensibility into a one-to-one material. So this is essentially a kind of mock-up. So we ended up kind of building this object at a one-to-one scale. So right now, this looks somewhat like a small conceptual cartoon model, but in reality, we ended up building this to around, I think it was about 16 feet in height. And so the goal was to try and achieve that conceptual relationship between the graphic sensibility and the idea of the model, but at a larger scale. So even the edges around the frame are actually foam. And so we had to detail the construction so that there was a kind of seamlessness. There was also this problem of slip and slide with the parts and pieces that you relate. But I think what's also really interesting about this is not only the fact that you're starting with a graphic, and then you're translating it to a model, and then to a built object, you're then photographing it, and it comes back to a kind of graphic. And so again, there's a kind of full circle, or a kind of conceptualism that's starting to take place. So these are some of the photographs of the kind of study that we're working on. And again, I find this just as fascinating as the built thing itself. That there's a kind of sensibility that there's a new project here that you could start to work on. So a lot of my work is kind of dealing with this idea of the translation in graphics. More recently, I've been looking at different types of aesthetics. I've started painting. I started painting because I was tired of the computer line. I was very interested in the imperfect line and how we make errors with gestures. And so right before the pandemic, I started kind of painting. I've done about 100 of these. And I've started to mess around with, let's say, material tectonics or material thicknesses. Some of these, which we'll get to in a second, I was the recipient out of 10 of the Art OMI residency this summer, where I had an opportunity to actually, let's say, paint a series of artifacts. This is in the space. But for me, it wasn't just about the painting. It was how can you start to use painting as a tool to maybe start to think about architecture in a more critical way. So I ended up producing a series of reflective ceiling plans. I used a reflective ceiling plan because I think it's a type of drawing that the public doesn't really engage in. So this is an example of that RCP. And so the idea is you're taking the kind of hand gesture or the mark making from the paintings and starting to translate that into something more architectural. So this is, again, an RCP is a drawing of the ceiling, so you have things like lighting or exhaust or types of, let's say, sprinklers. So here's another collection of them. And so the idea is how can you maintain, again, that kind of imperfect mark making as a problem for architecture. And so the idea was these could start to spark conversations about actual floor plans. So if I was to translate this into a floor plan, what kind of spaces am I going to get? More recently, I've been looking at really embracing three-dimensionality. I just opened my first solo painting exhibition at Honest Common, which is located at the Staples Center. And really trying to understand what it means to work beyond just a kind of flat 2D thing. The one on the right is actually something I've been looking at Midjourney, and how maybe artificial AI, you can start to maybe print those things. Again, this idea of like going from 2D to 3D or real or fake or digital or analog. And so this is the kind of next step of the investigation. I think that's it. Thank you.
This is Shringo. Here at university, I'm currently teaching the landscape media theory courses, and I'm also currently a PhD candidate in University of Virginia, where I have been teaching design computation courses at Landscape Research Center. So my work look at the intersection of landscape design, urban analytics, physical computing, and data-driven methodologies. Mainly driven from my interdisciplinary educational background in architecture, landscape architecture, and data science. So in general, I'm interested in bridging the workflows of analysis and design together by customizing tool sets through digital scripting, physical simulation models, and implementation of them to explore how these technologies can provide new perspectives to rethink design methodologies. So this is actually one of my first exploration I did in grad school. So in that project, I was seeking to develop a hydrodynamic visualization and modeling tool in order to support my own studio work in river restoration and rewildering. So without any off-the-shelf tools to allow me to quickly simulate and prototype design strategies, I built the software called Flux and use it for the site-specific simulation of the river water sedimentation vegetations. So by using this tool, I was able to prototype my own interventions. And however, there are a lot of limitations of digital simulation tool due to the complexity of the water dynamics and hydrology. So moving towards to my later research work, I moved to physical simulations and started to use microcontrollers, sensors, actuators to streamline the data transmission between the digital and physical world. While you can see that this responsive hydromorphological simulation tool I developed allows real-time data reading, processing, and visualization, reviewing invisible qualities on the list of water table. And another big advantage of physical simulation is the direct and intuitive material manipulations. So this tangible interface developed for the water table allows easy communication and collaboration between different professions. Well, during my PhD studies, I did some more explorative research project to apply a wide range of different technologies to this physical water table. For example, the industrial robotic arm is used here to shape the sand based on the sensed topography. And also the technology of machine learning and computer vision is explored here to generalize the 2.5-dimensional pattern that emerged from the morphological process. And this kind of purely data-driven methods shows great potential in such complex and dynamic systems. And at UVA, I was teaching an elective courses focused on the responsive and interactive technologies. In that seminar, the students explored the hardwares and softwares, including the low-cost sensors, biotic and abiotic interfaces, Internet of Things, and so on. So here is some students' work, but in that course, we specifically focusing on the environmental sensors and how these low-tech and open-sourced sensors could be customized, hacked, and repurposed. And at course, we introduced the students to the concepts of responsive environments. Here. So this one is visualizing the real-time sensed air quality and translating into the vibration of the gas and represented as a file table here. So in that course, we also introduced the concept of physical computing and also the concept of citizen sensing, asking how to employ low-cost sensors to develop evidence local environmental issues and empower citizens and designers to participate and use the data they collect. Well, another set of my work looks at how to integrate formal and spatial design into urban analytics. This is the work I did in practice when I was working in New York City Department of City Planning. There, my job was to build a tool to translate zoning regulation from text to computational code and then to 3D representations. So the project was developed for the in-house planners and urban designers to enhance their traditional workflows of citywide development scenario massings and envelope studies. So this tool allows the city to extremely saves a lot of time. The alternative workflow that developed here reached 90% time and cost reduction per study. And in a more recent work, collaborating with SWA Houston office, we looked at alternative streetscape design methods, and by using computer vision and machine learning, we were able to conduct more quantitative studies of the physical streetscape features. And this tool integrates two parts. The AI-aided streetscape design tool, which allows the designer quickly sketch streetscapes by using semantic color blocks, while the realistic photo can be generated in real time. And the urban scale analytical tool compares the design outputs to all existing Google Street View images of the city. And ultimate goal is to allow designers to simply upload, draw, edit color block sketches, and at the same time to be informed with the quantitative data, such as the greenery, visibility, walkability, etc. So to sum up, go back to my previous slide. I think I want to really talk about the importance of customizing own work tool sets. I think the innovation of the designing tool and design methodology should act as two forces towards the same goal, the produce a new model.
I'm Inez Light here. So I'm just really grateful to be here. I draw comics. I used to live in a desert shelter. I lived in a shipping container on the piers of Rotterdam. But I run a small practice called Bureau Spectacular. And today I'll just run through a bunch of projects that came from my office. This one is called Another Primitive Hut. Running Bureau Spectacular has been a difficult challenge because I draw cartoons, which is really odd when you think about someone who's doing architecture or teaching architecture and drawing cartoon. And sometimes the cartoonish sensibility comes into the work. Here I had an opportunity to represent Taiwan at the Venice Biennale. The title of this piece is Township of Domestic Parts, where I deconstructed the domestic program into 9 individual characters with architectural qualities, and each of them themselves with personalities of sorts. I also designed objects at the scale of lamps. This is a lamp I designed called Scribble. Luckily, it was collected by LACMA. But you're thinking, why would an architect think about a lamp? But I always loved the saying, from spoons to cities, right? The spoons to cities. So a proverbial spoon, like a lamp, that allows us to think about the scribbling act is really fantastic. Or entering the MoMA PS1 competition a number of years ago, I have a fascination with pools, especially the pool culture of Los Angeles. We had a chance to write a YouTube video for this, so if you are curious about this project, I encourage you all to check it out. I also had a chance to work with Coachella. A few years ago, the Tower of 12 Stories was the structure we got to build at Coachella. As though the pool fascination wasn't enough, we stacked a bunch of cartoonish bubbles vertically into an archicharacter. And this notion of the character that's lopsided, sort of being lazy, or being stuck onto each other, or sort of talking to each other as though let's say the personality of body parts can link each other, and can architectural components in urbanism have dialogues with one another, has always been a part of the work of Bureau Spectacular. But again, running a practice, drawing cartoons and teaching and writing, oftentimes I do write. These days I'm writing a book on Zoom with Dutch philosopher Timotheus Vermeulen. But this is maybe the newest of a line of writing and thinking. Maybe stems back from an earlier book I wrote entitled Citizens of No Place, where I drew an entire comic book graphic novel about architecture, about impossibly tall buildings that are 12 kilometers tall, about spaceships where plan, section, elevation become the same drawings. Or later on, when I discovered that maybe the cartoon wasn't just a device to tell stories, but the graphic sensibility, there's an architectural quality to the graphic that allows us to think about, let's say, interstitial spaces between the parts. So the title of this piece, Inside, Outside, Between, Beyond, eventually got collected by SF MoMA, which I also feel really fortunate about. Alongside these things, I also built a lot of structures within structures that I call super furniture. Too small to be architecture, but too big to be architecture, too big to be furniture. So this is the briefcase house, featuring my previous cat who passed away, Helvetica, and that was the beginning of Bureau Spectacular in that room. But the cartoons that I talk about, a lot of times the architecture or the structures come out of the cartoons. Again, here, a tower that is 12 kilometers tall, just scraping the bottom of the stratosphere, becomes a space that can be inhabited by 80 million people. When I moved to LA many years ago, I got a chance to translate some of the super furniture ideas into, let's say, applied market work. So this is Frankie in Arts District. This project is the Frankie headquarters. It's a super furniture that compartmentalizes into jigsaw puzzle. But my time in life in LA really began way back at materials and applications. Some of you might recognize Oliver, who sadly passed away, Hess. And this is a room that rotates at once an hour, where plan, elevation, reflective ceiling plan, over the course of an hour, all have an opportunity to become plan, which is part of the idea about the spaceship stories within the comic book. Also within the comic book, I talk a lot about postures and let's say primitive shapes and primitive bodies, let's say the body language of somebody who's uprising or crouching. And so this structure, White Elephant, was a let's say, translation out of that world. As well, another story that I wrote called The Future Archaeologist, I had an opportunity to construct this in South Korea and Seoul, where the idea of the excavation of the ground is a relationship with history, but the excavation of the air is a relationship with future. And so the 2,000 years of below and above can be articulated through this reflection. Some of the cartoonish graphic and sensible graphic qualities are translating into other furniture, such as this piece called Soft Rock, which you can find in Koreatown if you look hard enough. I don't really advertise this stuff, but more recently, just this year, 2022, the character here, the piece is called, this is the birdhouse in the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. The piece of this character is called A Flock Without a Murder. A flock without a murder. A scarecrow that scares away a murder of crows so that, the prey animals may exist within them. You might be wondering, does this person do architecture at all? I'm happy to report that our house project just got permitted, so I'm super excited that a ground-up residential work is now permitted. And these are some diagrams that I'm really excited about, the slivers of interior elevation. But, I just feel so fortunate to be here, and, how lucky can I be to live in LA and build a structure in front of this city hall. This is an oversized musical instrument titled House of Words. House of Words. I had a chance to collaborate with a musician, Morgan Sarn, where the cavity of this stuff upstairs is acting a lot like an electric guitar, so that he was doing this performance downstairs, speaking up onto it. I was working with Matthew Malnick, the structural engineer, to put all this on 4 studs, right? I think the moment we put away all the studs. Also, this moment on the right, it's too late. So this is the last slide, my last slide. I don't know how these characters are finding an audience, but recently DC Bit commissioned Bureau Spectacular to make an AR project. So above Grand Avenue, you'll see this network of structures that are flying above us as a parade of characters. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Wendy Folk. I feel like so far I'm probably the only one that's going to be presenting my own project. And okay, a little bit of background. I was born in Hong Kong and kind of educated and brought up in many different cities and countries. This is a photo of my office in New York. I am not from LA. I was not born in Mount Cedar and this is the building that was going to get demolished. And a lot of the work that I'm currently doing is the antithesis of my thesis. Unlike, again, the others that were presenting on like how much their thesis actually influenced them, this is essentially work that I have been doing all these years that is an antithetical kind of approach to what I've been learning all these years. It's going to be accomplished through kind of a lot of the research I'm looking at in essentially digital property and how kind of data infrastructures are, again, surrounding us and part of us, and how data is kind of part of our everyday life, but it's also kind of, I would say, damaging to our current welfare of how we are actually existing in the world. A lot of these images are actually from an upcoming book. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But it's also kind of how do we exist in a world where we are both existing in the world of purchasing real property, I'm very interested in real estate, but also kind of in a world where digital property is prevalent and it's also kind of easy to access for a lot of people that are interested in kind of investing in crypto. And a lot of these are questions. I think Doris actually has highlighted that in a previous presentation. I like to provoke questions, and my book would actually answer some of these hopefully. But I think a lot of the kind of information I'm also interested in is how much digital is isolating us for our future generations. How is it actually part of an everyday culture that we are currently being heavily surveyed in? And what are the economics and kind of socio-political discussions that are being unveiled and prevailed from larger topics of soft power, essentially? of data. And a lot of the kind of, I would say like chapter 4 and chapter 5 is about kind of looking at discussions of infrastructural needs, right? How are we looking at architecture in terms of urban planning, looking at how we are existing currently in a digital world, physical and digital world. Can we actually exist in kind of isolated silos? And what does it mean that if we are going to be existing in cities that are no longer cities, but just isolated realms, does that work, right? So a lot of these diagrams and kind of proposals and also studio research that has been being done in many years, nearly over a decade of research, is on the ideas of how I'm looking at it in the sense of playing with the concept of digital property, digital architecture, and how we're actually negotiating those terms. A lot of these diagrams are also going to be part of an upcoming exhibition in Toronto, and we're going to go with physical aspects, but also play with kind of the augmented reality aspects of it. The book is kind of a project that is also kind of trying to engage in issues currently of how many physical books have a shelf life. So the idea is that a lot of content that's created for the book also, I would like to think, has kind of continuation. So that there's a lot of kind of scannable content, there's also kind of a visual platform that complements the book itself, and there's going to be ongoing interviews with specialists and also colleagues, some amongst this room, that are going to be part of the ongoing kind of content creation. The kind of next discussions within that is also kind of larger curiosities of, are we actually controlling data? Is data controlling us? How are we actually looking at it as a part of automation? I also went very deep through a fellowship I had at the Library of Congress on looking at issues of automation. And then some, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the kind of research is also kind of in the larger realm of how our information is essentially controlled by 7 major tech companies. And if we are actually part of this larger Western world of information that's isolated and siloed, whereas all the kind of data is also controlled also by China with Huawei, Green, how are we actually kind of isolating worlds of soft capital and who controls the data? So these are kind of questions that are slowly anew. And then from that is a kind of next step of that is that I also am playing more tongue-in-cheek little new business that is called With Data. It's actually going to be done with 2 other USC students. They were part of my studio, and we're going to essentially make little bespoke kind of little databases. It's kind of an art project, I would say, based off of IKEA furniture. But the idea is kind of playing with the idea of can you actually live with your data if you never have access to it, and what happens with the data if you can actually embed it with your everyday life. So it's playing beyond the idea of if you never have access to your data, what happens if you actually can constantly have access to your data? Or what if you have it in your living room and it's your friend's data and you can never actually touch it? What are those relationships and how does that actually work? So it's laying upon large things. So again, here's a little bit of a plug, a book, buy it, there we go. But anyways, no, but overall the idea is it's going to be kind of addressing some of these issues. It is not a lot of my previous topics and projects. We're happy to talk about that if you're interested in my other projects, which are way more digital representation. So yeah, thank you very much.
Hi, I've actually never given a talk from a school like this, so this is very, very novel for me. My name is Peter Ackman. I'm teaching in the Landscape Architecture and Urbanism program. My talk will be a little bit different. My work is primarily historical. I work mostly on the U.S., although not exclusively. mostly on the 19th and 20th century city, suburb, metropolis, that sort of context. I'm also very much not of California. I grew up in the Northeast, in New Jersey primarily, and Washington, D.C. I'm coming most recently from UC Berkeley, where I did a PhD in geography, whatever that is exactly. We may not answer that question. I'm very interested in the design environment, but I'm equally interested in the vernacular landscape as well. My teaching deal with both of those poles. I'm interested in the most sort of ordinary, anonymous, serialized, sort of unprepossessing aspects of the American landscape. The fact that most of the American West has been constructed on a grid plan, for instance. Variety of landscapes that we could describe as suburban. Some of these forms are indigenous to the Americas, some are very much not. I find all of these worthy of comment and critique and historical analysis. I like to think our course is going okay. And in my teaching and my research alike, sort of preoccupied with these issues. I'll tell you about two projects primarily, two essentially book projects. One is based on my dissertation at Berkeley, one that is not. I sort of became a student of California without really meaning to. I did not come to California in order to spend years writing about it. I ended up constructing a dissertation that's basically a landscape history of one very particular edge, largely industrial and increasingly post-industrial edge of the Bay Area. It's very much a regional case study dealing with sort of a series of experiments in town building, industrial towns, company towns, industrial satellites of various sorts. A series of attempts by architects and landscape architects and industrialists working in complex and sometimes sort of disturbing collaborations to intervene on the lives of workers through the medium of the built environment. Contra Costa County and sort of eastern fringes of the Bay Area, I spent years just sort of walking and looking around, something I just left my own devices, and I found that the landscapes around me were posing a series of questions that my sort of intuition and my very sort of northeastern orientation to the world alone were no use in answering. I found myself driven into the archives and ended up writing, I think it was sort of an extended critical prehistory of the post-war suburb, perhaps, looking at certain suburbs that over the years have been sort of marked off, rendered more or less invisible, rendered abandonable in a series of different waves. The industrialization, post-war, 1970s, 1980s period. I came to California really just when a lot of the Bay Area and Southern California, for that matter, started looking a bit like that. The slide that's now in the recent cast for us. A series of waves, sort of suburban ruination, suburban abandonment, trying to set some of that in a richer, more complicated historical context. It's very much steeped in a sort of a vernacular approach to the built environment, urban and suburban morphology in a variety of ways. My second book project is actually the one that's going to appear first. It's not. It's a fiction book. And it's a bit more in the vein of what might be called the intellectual history of planning, landscape, and urbanism. I am in this latter project. It's really not about California. It is a transnational history of planning and urbanism, looking at sort of network of expertise emerging in the post-war period that I'm, for shorthand, sort of calling organized urban research and interlocking directorate of guys in suits sort of looming over scale models of the cities, pointing at things and indicating what they should be, the proper course of its future. The category of the future and sort of the urban future and futurity is of non-trivial interest to me, and sort of at the most conceptual and I guess fundamental level, interested in the temporality underlying what it is. I'm putting it very abstractly, in a sense, what it is to plan, and to that end, how historical knowledge, not only knowledge that I myself have sort of dug out of the archives, but how a variety of people, a variety of points in history, have sought to sort of leverage knowledge or information about past and present in order to infer the course of the urban, metropolitan, so forth, future. I also have a non-trivial interest in the history of urban visualization, the role of diagrams in relation to the hand and the eye in the construction of urban imaginaries, and again, sort of a conceptual history, ontological history in a sense, and epistemological history underlying a wide range of actual interventions on the actual material fabric of cities, especially in the US, but not only. The book projects are taps between North and South America, looking for 100 or so pages at a very specific Newtown project constructed by a group of planners based on the eastern seaboard of this country, in Venezuela specifically, in sort of the Cold War context, a tap between the global North and the global South. But here we are in LA. Again, I'm very much not from LA. I think it's important to sort of remain unadapted to one's surroundings to some extent. I've seen some nods. That sense of sort of utter defamiliarization of one's ordinary surroundings is sort of central to my method. I'm teaching here sort of half-time. I'm also involved with a sort of mysterious institution based downtown called the Bruin Institute. It's sort of a think tank, for lack of a better term, and also with an entity over in Burnside called the Center on Science, Technology, and Public Life. I've been telling you all about the past, but it has been, in a sense, a history of the urban future as imagined and partially realized. In conjunction with Bruin and STPL, as of perhaps this time next year or the year after that, at the latest, we're sort of convening a new institution of sorts called the Observatory on Urban Futures. This is the first time I've sort of asserted this publicly. You can dwell on what that might mean, and maybe we'll talk in a year. And thanks for your attention.
I'm going to say it over here because it's where I teach 964. That's how I do it. So I'm starting with this slide because the work I do is really collaboration intensive, and that's partially because I see myself as primarily producing, encapsulating, and disseminating knowledge, architectural knowledge primarily. So a lot of this started with my work at Gary Technologies, where I would often work with architects, engineers, fabricators, sometimes the client themselves, to create tools, again, that would disseminate knowledge, allow them to be usable. So I can sort of see myself as in Andrew Witt's constellation of gray boxing, as a producer of these gray boxes for others to use. So you can see here is the script and the output. I'm very much interested in the physical aspect of this. Since then, I have moved on to the biggest firm you've never heard of, called DLR. And it's an integrated design firm, which means I've actually working a lot with electrical engineers and mechanical engineers. And every once in a while, we can work with a subcontractor and we can do some geometry again, which is really my passion. But increasing this idea of just gaining more knowledge and being able to encapsulate it. And so when you think, because I think about architecture in these systemic ways and think about architecture as various systems, I no longer, when I see a building, I don't see architecture, I see multiple buildings as architecture. And so when you extrapolate that, it's very easy to begin to see architecture as animated. In screenshots that Matthew Allen talks about, he sets up a binary between mosses in different sort of screenshots and getting text like Google data. And I think what the real beauty is that, as programmers, as more architects become programmers, we actually have the opportunity to choose what we show and how we show it through the computer. And so I'm really interested in this idea. It's programs as a new type of architectural text. And what excites me about it is that the syntax is, superimposed on top of forms, so they're really the same thing, and it's a new type of reading. And because of this sort of way I work, I'm also very comfortable with the digital. And so I have this other interest, this continued interest in producing these types of, embodied knowledge out of digital for physical space. Bringing virtual into the physical space. So there's a series of projects that we worked on that we call digital assemblies. A lot of us started working with dancers. They inhabit space very differently than most people do. And so we've learned a lot from working with them and then again working between them, giving them tools to enhance the space they use. We've also started reaching out to like bigger swaths of types of virtual space. So, for instance, Wikipedia, live updates and how that can inhabit a space and how it can bring communities that might be far apart together. So, there's a lot of interactive stuff going on. There on the right, you can see the live stream Wikipedia feed. This is a gallery solution that we load. And so we're increasingly, enhancing the types of data and types of digital aspects we're able to bring into this space. So that was a feed. Our newest project is we just won a project for Little Tokyo. So this is the second Alameda. If anyone knows how to get a PCA to sign a contract, I would love to talk to you after this. But in this, we're sort of taking the archive from Little Tokyo and superimposing it with sort of real-time digital media that people can sort of take on the site. A way to use these digital assemblies to sort of, bring the past and the present together. So, most architects are used to building with wood, with steel, and we just see the digital as another type of material we can add into that repertoire. So in this object, this house, we are using weather data, both locally sensed and sort of nationally from a server. And giving people an opportunity to interact with their environment and get feedback from their environment they might not otherwise have. So here you can sort of move furniture to change the temperature in the space. And sort of what the digital is telling you is the difference in temperature between the interior and the exterior. So again, just continuing to create different types of embedded knowledge that, encapsulated knowledge that people can use, whether it's architects producing things or people inhabiting space. And a lot of times when I talk about computational stuff, people sort of conflate it with certain styles or movements in architecture. But we like to see ourselves as using this in all aspects and all types of projects. So here, for instance, a simple roof frame is still needed in grad school. In this way, we're looking beyond just typically, the digital gets used in only like fabrication stuff, but here we're looking at using digital tools also for sort of material ecologies, right? Reusing materials, thermal comfort, daylighting, this sort of material logistics also, this sort of stuff. And because we're able to make our own tools, we can use them, again, in multiple phases of the project. Oftentimes you get a one-dimensional sort of platform that will say they'll give you something, but we are using tools, in this instance, a cartographic tool to find odd lots. We're looking for funny lots that might not be apparent as to a developer. And then we're able to also make tools that allow us to engage clients at earlier stages of design, right? By allowing us to play with pro formas and even revenue generation on projects. So really, like I said, I see my architectural project as a highly collaborative one where we are sort of, again, producing, encapsulating, and disseminating knowledge for others to use. But I hope that this gives architects more agency in the work.
Hi, I'm Laura. I'm not. Yes. Okay. I'm not from LA. I'm originally from Kansas City, born and raised, and then I'm here to share my architecture journey, which started at Cornell, then New York, Beijing, Hong Kong, and then we're here in LA. So really, when I went to Beijing, it was supposed to be a 6-month research stint. I ended up being 15 years, and that's where I started spatial practice. This is spatial practice, the accumulation of ideas, people, and circumstances. Imagine a spatial practice world. Wouldn't be lovely. Spatial practice was formed in 2009 with myself and my husband, Eric Amir. We're very much a team. We do projects, everything from small art installations to residential towers to large master plan exercises. But mostly our designs are very much focused on the human interaction. This is our first project in Beijing, China. It was crazy. It was a paid competition where we were competing with a developer for the last remaining lots in Beijing. We were competing against like the largest corporate offices to the largest design offices. I'm not sure how we got invited, but it was but what I wanted to say, the developer didn't get selected, but this very much is an overriding theme of all of our designs. It was about human interaction. Beijing has expedient, CBD is dead. No one's there anymore. We were very much focused about how do we bring this like eco spine, how do we bring people into the towers. So our second project site, it's called the Light Hotel. We were commissioned by a lighting company to create an architecture branding project. So this project was designed based on shadows and light. And we're talking about that this void. Unfortunately, this project took 10 years to get built. We had to do 3 variations. This is all the different variations. Each one was very difficult because we would get to the permit stage and then something would happen and we would start over again. Anybody in small practice understands this. And it was not easy to do, but we ended up building this one. It's called One More Residential Tower. It was very much focused at the end, I think, about view and horizontality. How do we just bring simplicity in design into a project? And although it was frustrating 10 years, I think this design was the nicest. It was nice and simple, and it really stood out. As you can see, this is a typical typology of Taiwanese architecture. This kind of brick, modular window, punch windows. And we just wanted something simple. The site is located in front of their Central Park in Kaohsiung. And so just to exaggerate the view and the horizontality, and creating this kind of variation of the depths in the facade. This personally is my favorite project. Unfortunately, it was not built. It was commissioned by the same client for his showroom, and it was supposed to be his showroom, and then offices on top of the restaurant on the bottom. We also sculpted this building out with light, with one point where we twisted it open, and then the shadows and cast. These are some of our researches, which goes back to what we were talking about, the accumulation of themes, the network of themes, how this impacts our design as designers, how this impacts space. We were thinking about how like the virtual network of themes, the physical network of themes, and how they are integrated. This is called the Indigo Waterfall. It's a permanent art installation in Kucha, Japan. It was very much designed based on celebrating both industries in Tokushima. Originally, they were known for indigo ink making, and then now it's about LEDs. And so we wanted to create this beautiful image of ink spilling into the water. Fun fact about this project is we wanted our original design, they wouldn't let us do it because of the boats and it's dangerous. So what ended up happening is with the LEDs, there's like thousands of hand-cut scores on LEDs to create this rippling effect, which I think probably won't happen in Japan. This is Varna Public Library. This is a competition entry that we want to place for. Again, this focuses on questioning public space and what is the role of these institutional buildings that we have today about libraries, and what role does the library play today. We were talking about how do we bring in the urban library room and then creating a library as a space that's 24 hours, that allows people to come, also respects the original function of the library, but also allowing this becoming a really nice public space. This is the Shenyang Aquatic Center. Again, this was a resident tower in Shenyang. If you don't know, it's very cold there, and so the design was very simple. We just kind of peeled it open to embrace sunlight and also protection from the elements. This is for the sale. If anybody's ever in Taiwan, please go there. It's a Michelin star restaurant. We had this relationship with this client for 5 years. Trying to build a space for her. At the end, she decided she needed to actually find a space where she could build her own architecture piece instead of it out. The original design is how do we create an experience that echoes her dining experience? How do we create this kind of like mitigation between chaos and like filtering out your day, just so you can go in and fully embrace her food and her experience. This client is amazing. She shared a people passion. She would take her kitchen to Spain for the summer and taste like 40 tomatoes just to understand all the tomatoes. So yes, we really wanted to create this architecture that wasn't about mission start with this project. And this is the Bauman Art Museum. It's, again, we're focusing about art museums and what is the art museum in the city today? How do we create public space? How do we bring people into the space without really impacting the program of the museum? Especially in China, it's really amazing, like you see people out there like doing their flag exercises. And now we're in LA. Can't really show too many of our Los Angeles projects, but this is one image. We were fortunate to be doing a renovation of what we call the Lost Miniature Project. It's almost finished, should be finished soon. But through this exercise, we had to understand at a smaller scale, what do we keep, what do we don't keep?